So like I mentioned, we'll be sharing some practical tips today to help you organize your communities as winter's coming, even if that doesn't mean incredibly cold weather, like I've experienced in New Jersey, which we all know is not my favorite place. There are some challenges that are associated with COVID, with winter restrictions, new mitigation measures. And so I'm excited to kind of go through, whoever's next slide, awesome. We'll go through some of the key questions, practical tips, and use cases from our experience working with, I think, over 170 cities and counties collectively. So some of those key questions that we've noticed among our conversations with these 170 municipalities, represented for all of you joining us today as well. Some that we've noticed in our conversations are whether or not residents understand local health guidelines and regulations, between state, city, county, federal regulations. It can be difficult for residents to keep track of where information and updates are coming from. And so Zencity will share some strategies and examples of how to help with that. Another question was, to what extent do residents support current policies such as mask mandates and social distancing requirements? And David and Gabby, feel free to jump in here if there's been any special sub-questions that come up with that. And then lastly, in which communities do we, as cities and counties and local government entities, need to focus our efforts moving forward?
Excellent. And so I want to reiterate, are we hearing any other types of questions from some of our communities here? Anything else that you want to share or jump in or ask your colleagues what they're hearing in the community? So if you could raise your hand, we can call on you and allow you to talk and share some other questions that you may have.
And so this is an invitation throughout the rest of the workshop here. So I'm really looking forward to hearing some of the challenges that you may be facing specifically in your communities, and maybe as we're rolling through some strategies of how Zencity can help you pinpoint these conversations and concerns, and sharing some stories of other cities, maybe these questions will come to mind. And like David said, I encourage you to jump in on the conversation.
Great, so we'll get started with the first question. Do residents understand health guidelines and regulations? We saw this question definitely prevalent in the beginning of the summer as the COVID situation was ramping up, as you all well know. And we really see the resurgence of this question again in the last couple of weeks, as a lot of communities that shut down businesses and other types of gatherings open them up again and are now shutting down much more and getting ready, of course, for Thanksgiving and the holiday season. And so we see this question coming back. Where municipalities and counties are really concerned. Do people understand what is being asked of them? Do people understand the regulations? Do business owners and restaurant owners and all these things understand what regulations are out there that they have to comply with and in order to mitigate the spread of COVID-19 and keep the community safe moving forward? And so one of the tips that we want to share for how to deal with that is really, as you all a lot of well know, is to focus and use the Zencity projects and also our email alerts and digests to track specific issues. So we have lots of different projects across our clients, but also specific ones in each community, looking at specific issues around COVID response. So everything from masks, but also enforcement of health regulations, our business regulations, these kinds of things. We're tracking all issues, whether very broad or also very specific to your community. For example, we work with a community that has a special form called the Purple Form that they have to fill out. And so we're helping the city track, are people actually following the rules of this Purple Form? Do business owners understand what it means to comply in order so that they can open safely, keep businesses open, but also keep the community safe? And so we encourage you to reach out to us, to use the project request feature in the dashboard, or to reach out to us directly to help you track specific issues around helping the community understand the regulations. And of course, we can set up specific digests and email alerts around those issues. So do that. We also want to share two examples from some of our communities that we're working with right now about this issue. And so we're actually getting a question here from one of our communities. Can we make a digest just for one person, for one user in the city? So yes, we absolutely can. We can set up specific alerts for specific users, whether they be the head of a department or the communications team, so that we're sending these alerts to one user in the city and not spamming all of the users. So definitely that's one of the customizations that we're happy to help create for you.
If I can even jump in there, I think that question touches on our custom digest, which you can find in your Zencity subscriptions section. So if you go to where it has your name on the dashboard, you'll find your subscriptions. I personally love the custom digest because it's a build your own email type of playground. And so you can decide, whereas the COVID summary comes either daily or weekly, you can actually choose to get a specific element of COVID, a specific keyword or a specific project, when you want it and how you want it. And so when I mean how, you can decide if you want 50 data items so you don't go in the dashboard. If you want to just see what piques your interest, you can. And so the custom digest, if you're on this call now, you can reach out to your customer success manager. You can ask us questions here and now, where this is what we're here for. If you want to make your own custom digest, and you can edit them at any point. And I think that's a great question, which brings us to a great solution actually that we offer.
Exactly. So thanks, Allison, for that. We'll share some examples of how we're seeing cities use their different tracking, especially with our insights around this issue of enforcement regulations. And so when one city was looking into, this is a large city in California that we work with, we're looking into trying to, where they were sending out code enforcement officers around the city to try to enforce some of the new regulations that the city and the county had put in place. And they asked us to help them understand, okay, where do residents expect the officials to focus their enforcement efforts? And we saw with our analysis over time that residents really expected business owners to lead the compliance efforts. Residents did not want the police or code enforcement officers to be going around and giving tickets to individual patrons of businesses, but rather they saw business owners and managers as the real core area that should lead enforcement and then the compliance with different health regulations. And so with this, the city then actually went and focused both primarily its education and outreach efforts to try to ensure that business owners understand the regulations, understand the rationale behind the regulations, and to make sure that they're complying moving forward. That's one of the big things. We saw that especially with restaurants and small retail. A second example along that line, we see from a town, a suburb of Chicago, that was took some of the Zencity data and used it to help convince the local farmers market, local business owners, to help work with them to make clear health rules and regulations and policies clear to the residents in the community, and to communicate to the residents that, hey, our market is open, come and shop, come spend money, come support the economy, but at the same time know that we're keeping you safe, that the regulations are in place, and to make sure that everyone is on the same page. And so with these examples, we'll move over to our second big question.
Yeah, so this is a question that we're dealing with a lot. We find a lot of our cities are dealing with a lot in the last year since COVID hit. And I think this is a fascinating question to tackle, and it's a little bit complex to look at it. So the question is, to what extent do residents support current policies such as mask mandates and social distancing requirements? So on the slide, yeah. So one key issue to look at here is look at neutral sentiment. So neutral sentiment tends to kind of, in many instances, kind of be neglected, and usually our tendency is always to look at the positive and the negative sentiment. But neutral sentiment can tell us a lot in these type of cases where a city is implementing a policy change or specifically a mask mandate. So first of all, looking at the dashboard, there's a few ways to look at the neutral sentiment. With every item, you can see on the arrow here above on the left-hand side, the breakdown of the sentiment, and you can see that neutral sentiment will be very dominant in many times. If you want to take a specific look at those specific neutral comments, you can easily filter through your filter comments bar up here and look only at neutral comments. And also, when we're talking about neutral sentiment, so what we're seeing here is usually the likes. So the way this works at Zencity is that the likes carry on the sentiment of the post. So for example, if a post is tagged as neutral, then those likes and shares will also carry on that sentiment of the original post. Unless there's other types of likes, like Facebook has different categories of likes, like the angry faces, and those tend to be obviously counted as negative. But the idea here is that when people are liking something or sharing something, they're also showing support for that specific policy, but they're doing that in a more passive way, but we still count that as support. So I think a great example, if we can move to the next slide, will be looking at policy decisions. And specifically, this is an example about a mask mandate that was implemented by one of our cities recently. And what we can see here is very interesting. So if we just look at the verbal commentary, just look at the comments themselves, then we'll see a lot more opposition. You can see here on the right-hand side, 62% of negative sentiment versus only 38% of support. So we're seeing a lot more opposition on the comments, where people tend to be more vocal and kind of more passionate about the way they're opposing that specific mandate. But if we look at the large scale of the picture, and we also take those likes and all that neutral sentiment that's coming from the likes and the shares, and we aggregate that together and kind of cluster that together with the shows of support for the mandate on the commentary, then we see a different picture. We see the reverse, right? So we see on aggregate that most people, almost 60%, 59%, are showing support for the mandate. And that can be a little bit misleading, because when we kind of are naturally drawn to look only at the commentary, then we kind of get the feeling that people are very much against the new policy, or here specifically against the mask mandate. So I would highly recommend differentiating and looking at those separately. And the best practice with Zencity was just to be able to request an insight, right? So if you have a mask mandate coming up and you have the ability to ask for an insight, and our team will make sure to look at that specific issue in depth and provide you with that breakdown and with that understanding that can give you a better understanding of really how much support versus opposition that specific policy change or initiative is showing.
Yeah, I think mask mandates especially can get tricky when it comes to support or opposition, especially in Zencity, because it's such a nuanced issue. And so I think the insight request is actually a great idea to save you time, for those of you watching from home or the office, and allowing us and our analyst team to help break down that more nuanced sentiment and give you the opinion breakdown. So I think that's a great idea.
So Gabi, we have a question here that says, so after the mask mandate came in place, how can a city use Zencity to see if the action was successful? What indicator, what can we see in the platform that maybe indicates that the mask mandate's working or people are accepting it?
So that's a great question. I think there's two key elements of that. First of all is to track it over time and to see the change and the trends. First of all, usually we see that there's like a peak in the level of discourse and the volume of discourse. And if you see after a few days that that's kind of dwindling down and the amount of volume is lowering, that's usually a sign that things have kind of calmed down, right? You have this initial response with a lot of comments and people very much engaged in the debate, but with time progression, as time progresses, we see that going down. So that's one way, and also to look at sentiment over time. I think with something with like a mask mandate, a best practice would be to request an insight about that and then request another one after a week or two to analyze that and compare that to the first insight, and that can give you a really good understanding of how the public is feeling about that specific initiative.
Yeah.
I think I'll add this. Another thing that I've seen in a lot of communities is that we've seen the mask mandate issue, in particular, and other types of restrictions. We've seen the volume of discourse is typically quite high when those initiatives are enacted and those mandates are enacted, and we see that dwindle off over time. And I think in communities where it's a bit more contentious, we see that volume kind of stay high. And I think seeing the volume go down over time using the projects like the COVID projects, which we see here, and seeing how the shift between sentiment also changes is also a really effective way to see the overall trend. And then, of course, as Gabi said, to request an insight to have us do a bit of deeper dive into the issue. So great, we'll go to our third question.
Yeah, so looking at which communities in which we should be focusing our efforts, we'll just go to the next slide. I mean, I think there's a lot of questions oftentimes on what are the different needs if you don't have a homogenous community, and so being able to make sure you're answering to the concerns and the misinformations among different pockets of your population. So one thing that Zencity can help with is identifying where the conversation is happening. And so whether you're actively going through the dashboard of great best practice to find out where these conversations happen is to use your source filter. So if you're wearing that communications hat and that's your role within your city or county, You can focus specifically on channels. You can even look for specific sources. So if you have a high Spanish-speaking population, for example, with a few pages that you're tracking in Zencity that have data in Spanish, you can choose those sources to look at in isolation and to see, what is being said in those communities. Alternately, looking at a more visual standpoint, that's already done for you when you open up a project or you're looking for your dashboard, is my favorite widget in Zencity, which is the social media sources. And so here it's kind of the best of all worlds because you're looking at the main drivers of the conversation. So if you're in a project, for example, coronavirus masks project, and you're looking at the social media sources widget, you can actually see who are the drivers in the social media and online community for this conversation. And so, for example, here looking at this screenshot that we have is like 25%, for example, of the data in that project would be from the Mercury News. And you can actually also see an added element of data here, which is the sentiment. And so seeing that actually this news channel's pretty much generating relatively positive sentiment, whereas KRON 4 News, which is 14% of the discourse where the conversations are happening, tends to be a bit more negative. And so you can also click on any one of these news sources or social media sources in the widget to look at the conversations on that specific channel. So if you wanted to look at what's causing this negative sentiment, you can really hone in on the KRON 4 News data. And I think sometimes we talked about neutral sentiment, and I think negative sentiment can be a good alert for potential misinformation or for confusion. Because that's just, where complaints tend to happen and can get registered by the AI as negative. And I'm sure all of you have had your experience in one way or another with negative sentiment. And so bringing this into a more applicable example, we have one city that we work with that has a very significant Spanish-speaking population. And so like I mentioned earlier, being able to make sure you're hitting the right note among your different communities is informing outreach to local communities. So what we were able to do is with our language translation services, we were able to identify priorities with COVID-19, the COVID, I need more coffee. With the COVID on English channels versus Spanish speaking channels. And so whereas on the English channels, people were more preoccupied and worried about access to testing among the discourse in Spanish, and you can see this word cloud here, actually a majority of the words are in Spanish. It seemed to be that the main concern was exposure to the virus at work. And so being safe at work was a key priority, and this helped the city focus their messaging among the Spanish-speaking community on being safe in the workplace and providing resources for maintaining, health standards and enforcement in the workplace. So it can help not only identify, but also confirm maybe priorities among different communities and make sure that you're addressing them properly.
Allison, we have a question here. How is this data displayed in Zencity for those who don't see it yet? The Spanish-speaking data.
So any data item that is in Spanish or any language actually that's detectable by Google Translate will be automatically translated for you in your dashboard as a special service. And so if you come across a data item and it says, translate it, then you can actually click on, there's an option to view the original, but the default is it will show up in the translated version into English.
But it will show, but you can also see it in its original form if you want. If you want
to, yeah. And so if you're working with community partners, let's say you wanted to share this information with, a community member who works with a Spanish-speaking population, you can, share the content of these posts in Spanish in this case, or in the original language.
Yeah, excellent. So great. We're nearing the end of our workshop, so I want to encourage anyone, if anyone has any questions or any thoughts or any experiences that they'd like to share with their colleagues, please raise your hand in the Zoom webinar, and we'll call on you and give you the floor. So any questions or any thoughts you want to share, please do so. We'll wrap up. We're just going to give a brief sneak peek to some of our exciting new premium features that we're launching in the coming weeks as we head into 2021. I'm excited to give you a brief sneak peek into them. Just briefly, we're starting to do a bespoke survey service, which is powered by Zencity's AI, which allows us to do, oh, I think we have a question in the chat. Sorry, we'll go back for a second. Have you seen any data about vaccines and how the discourse around that topic is shaping up? So yeah, very interesting. I will share while we have this screen up that we've been asked a lot about vaccines and particularly the COVID vaccine. I'll say for the flu vaccine, we've seen very significant discourse around the flu vaccine compared to previous years, as you can imagine. But it's very interesting is as the news has come from Pfizer and Moderna, the pharmaceutical companies, we've actually been surprised that the vaccine discourse has been a little bit lower than we expected. We think that actually has to do with the fact that a lot of the news and a lot of the discourse is happening on a national level or international level even, and has not really taken up a local government element yet. And so we're waiting really for local governments, for counties, for cities to start to talk about their plans for distribution, how that's going to work on a local level. I think that's why we haven't actually seen as much discourse in the last 2 weeks as we were expecting to see. We were a bit surprised by that, but we also think when we dug a bit deeper, it was a bit, we kind of understand why.
So it hasn't really trickled down, it sounds like, to being a city or county centric issue yet until residents are associating that service or accessing a vaccine through their local government.
Yeah, but we are definitely forecasting that to be the key topic of next year of 2021 as cities start and vaccinating the population, and that will definitely be a key issue to follow. And we say here in Zencity that the vaccines are the masks of 2020, and so they'll be the masks of 2021. So we're sure to see a lot of discourse about that, but like David said, it still might be a bit early for that, but we're definitely going to be tracking that over time.
And I'm really hoping we get a lot of positive sentiment towards the vaccine personally. But I will say also on vaccines, David kind of noted this as well with the flu vaccine in general. I think there's been a pretty consistent trend of cities and counties who are pushing messaging, providing resources for residents, for information on where they can get vaccinated is pretty consistent, as would be expected.
And very highly valued. And so, yeah, we see a lot of shares, a lot of likes, really people want to share that information out there. We have a question already about our new premium services, very exciting. So a question regarding surveys. As you work with many cities, do you have any suggestions for questions? Absolutely. So we have a team now dedicated to helping run surveys, and really where we think we're bringing in our added value here is leaning on our AI capabilities and our ability to parse through data very quickly. We have a really quick turnaround time with these surveys, getting them from conception to a report in your hands within 5 weeks. And part of that is also we have a team dedicated to helping you formulate those questions. We have some also kind of off-the-shelf questions on specific issues, whether they be COVID related. We'll get into that in a second. COVID related or other things from community development, budgeting.
I've done police benchmarking surveys of quite a few of my
sustainability have been two issues that I've been dealing with surveys in the last months.
Yeah, and I think, like you mentioned, the real gem here is being able to quantify those qualitative opinions, those open-ended questions, instead of having to go through and make sense of it yourselves. That's what our team is there to do. I loved the word parse. That was a great word. That was awesome. And so I think it's interesting because we are running surveys across quite a few cities and counties. And so we've gotten a lot of positive feedback on the process. And so we're extending it as a full premium service available. And yeah, I mean, the range of topics is pretty much endless, and having that question bank as a place to work off of and consulting on, good question and survey design is a really important piece there.
And also the opportunity to look at the results from the surveys and correlate that with the discourse on social media and see the connection between that. That's also a strong part of our survey offering.
Yeah, that's super interesting when you have like a highly let's say positive response to a question on a survey, and then you compare it to the data in Zencity, and if it's, seeing, if different channels elicit different types of responses, and being able to be aware of that is really important. Yeah. It's a great point.
And two more tools I want to talk about very briefly are the Community Compare, which is our first, is both a tool within the dashboard and also the specialized custom reports that we're doing now to help. We're now looking at a lot of data that we have across North America, and so we're looking at a way to help compare and give you a sense of context of your data compared to other communities like you around North America in particular. So reach out to us to learn more about that tool. And finally, also new custom engagement reports, where we're taking in other data sets that the city may have, whether it be from council sessions or community relations sessions, especially we're doing a lot of work on police community feedback right now. Any place you have a lot of data that, again, we want to help you make some sense out of it. And with that, we'd like to just remind everyone that the time to use CARES funding and other types of emergency funding, as you well know, is quickly running out. And so we're now offering a special CARES Act package of some of these services, which will include 2 COVID-19 surveys. And again, it's from our experience with specific questions that are popular around communities, and we'll help also customize those as necessary. And 2 comparison reports to other cities around COVID-related issues. So again, reach out to us, reach out to your customer success manager if you're interested to hear more about these services in general, and if you're interested in taking advantage of our CARES Act package. So with that, I think we're pretty much out of questions, and we're just hitting 30 minutes. So I want to really thank everyone, and thank Allison, thank Gabi, my esteemed colleagues, and wish everyone a very, very happy and a very safe Thanksgiving.